Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me again today. It's right now I'm on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo, and it's a beautiful weekend day. So if it's beautiful where you are and you've tuned in with me for another week, I'm really grateful to have you here with me and to share an interview that I did earlier this week with Mary Wu Sims. So normally we have a live conversation and we take your questions. And we're still happy to take your questions, but Mary Wu Sims is in Australia, and our 12 noon time just didn't really work for her because I think it's, I don't know, 4 or 5 a.m. over there. So we had a conversation a few days ago, and I'll be playing that for you today. But before I get started, in the comments, please say hello. Let me know you're there. And let me know where you're joining us from. And maybe why. If there's a special reason why you're here, I would really, really love to know what that is. But I want to tell you that I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm really glad to have this opportunity to do this work. So the work has shifted a little bit, as it should. Oh, pardon me while I move my screen around a little bit so I can see your comments. Yeah, so the work has shifted a little bit, focusing not less broadly on women in the women's movement, lesbians in the women's movement, and more specifically around issues of race and racism, which of course were a big part of the work in the women's movement. And Mary Wu Sims, who we're going to hear from today, was certainly a key contributor to those conversations then, and continues to do so now. Hi, IT. I see you. Thank you for letting me know you're out there. It's really good to have you here again. So I wanted to share before I got to Mary Wu just something that's in the news today here in Canada. A really devastating article by Tanya Talaga about the history of racism in this country, particularly as it pertains to Indigenous people. But she's putting that in the broader context. And if you haven't read this article yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's so necessary. And I think what I want to talk about today is a concept called racial stamina. So I'm really speaking here to non-racialized people. And a writer named Robin DiAngelo, in her book White Fragility, talks about white folks needing to develop their racial stamina, by which she means the discomfort that comes from addressing these issues both within ourselves and within society at large. And I think it's a really useful term, and I think it's something to consider particularly right now, because while many of us who are who do feel that Black Lives Matter, not all lives matter, it's I feel a lot of hope from what's happening out in the streets. But that's really, as those of you who have political experience know, that's just the first step. There's so much more work that happens, both behind the scenes, but also planning into the future. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm calling on all of us to do that work, to step up and be in it for the long haul. So hi, Cynthia, and hi, Susan. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'll just pop Susan's hello in our screen there. Oh, that's coming out really, really big. But yes, willingness to shift topically. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I'm really excited to have people who are joining me in this work. And just maybe the last thing I'll say on this point before I get to Mary Wu is one of the things people have been doing is passing the mic. And I actually have been thinking for a long time about the way in which lesbian is a racialized category. Lesbian is a very white category, as is gay. And I've been thinking for some years about how to uh, change that, and through the work that I do as an oral historian. So I'm thinking this morning, I've been thinking about passing the mic, this being the mic, over to people of color, particularly young people of color, because that's what I want to promote. Anyways, if you have any thoughts about that or ideas about that, let me know. But I would really like to do that if I can. I'm not going to say in amongst all the many other things I'm doing, because we all are doing many things. But anyways, that's what I would really, really like to do. So if you have thoughts or if you have ideas, please share them. Okay, so enough about that. Mary Wu Sims is, here we go. I wanted to show this. So she did participate in the project of the exhibit. I've been working with Mary Wu for a couple 2 or 3 years now. And this is her banner. And she has such an incredible, rich past. So I'll tell you a little bit about that before then I'll play the interview I did with her. And I'm here the whole time, so even though it's a pre-recorded interview, please do comment and ask questions, because you'll see at the end, Mary Wu would really like to see your questions and hear them, and she would really like the opportunity to answer them later. So any comments or questions you add there, she'll be able to see, and she promises to follow up with a reply. So she was born in 1956 in Hong Kong. Her father was white Australian, and her mother was Chinese. And she and her mother came to Canada in 1970. And while working for TELUS, she became involved in the union movement. And through that, became very much an activist. She participated in the BC Federation of Labor Women's Rights Committee in the mid-70s. She also participated in the development of anti-sexual harassment and affirmative action programs. For a while, she ended up in Ontario. Again, they're working on anti-racism advisory committee. She was co-chair of the Campaign for Equal Families. And finally, in 1996, she was appointed Chief Human Rights Commissioner for British Columbia. So really quite an extraordinary career. And she has a lot to say. This is a life's work for her, and she has a lot to say on this topic. So without further ado.
What a time, hey? What a time.
Well, so let's talk about that. I thought
right.
we would do this time as we met in September, and you were the first guest on Lesbian Lives Live, and that was a really fantastic interview. And I thought, and we talked a little bit more about your background story and your family, your mom. And I thought this time, I just really wanted to start talking to you about what's going on right now in the U.S. and then the response and how that's landing on you right now, and how you're sitting with all that.
Well, I've had a very long career. I call it a career because it was a career. I was in the public service, but I think I was very fortunate, privileged, however you want to call it, to have as my principal work human rights work. So since the since the mid 1970s, all right, we started talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, equal employment opportunity, as it was then known, which then evolved over time to employment equity and then equality and so forth. But you know, anti-racism was there as well, because it was one, you know, the earlier grounds covered by human rights legislation were really, you know, race, religion, gender, and disability even came in later. So the thing is that human rights and our understanding of human rights is always evolving. But I was lucky enough to actually work in a field that I believed in and continue to believe in, and yeah, it's been a long time. So, you know, when the Me Too movement happened, it was a time to reflect on, for me, why didn't we get any further with talking about and eliminating gender discrimination and sexual harassment. When Black Lives Matter came around the first time around, because this is not the first time we've talked about Black Lives Matter, right? This is like, what, the second or third iteration of it. Why haven't we gotten very far? And so it's really, for me, it is a moment of reflection and sometimes regret. And the regret is not just my own. I think it's a societal and government policy regret. Because when I look back at places where, you know, we were just getting going on this, and then government eliminated the Human Rights Commission, or we were just getting to that point, and then it was like, oh no, this is not an essential issue. Human resources, or how you manage your human resources, or how you talk about equality and how you measure results. Oh no, that's not important. What's important is my bottom line and how many profits we have, or you know, there's another cutback to government services and we're included in that. So, you know, it really is a time for me to just like, it's reflection on how many times have we been at this before, and is this going to be the momentum sustaining moment, right? Is this going to be the place where we just say no more? Like, we're going to move forward, we're not going to be pushed back, and we're going to remain vigilant, and everybody has a role to play in this huge fight. This, you know, it's huge, because we're already seeing the pushback, right? I mean, the moment that people can say, you know, 75-year-old protesters against violent police violence, right, are somehow staging their own injury and fall, and somehow, you know, it's some sort of conspiracy to catch police doing a bad thing. I mean, that's when it just blows my mind. It just blows my mind. I don't even have words for it. I just kind of like, incredulous, right? So I think we need to be aware that there is a pushback, and the pushback happens not even when we achieve equality. It's like the mere talk of wanting equality, right? Like when feminists talked about wanting equality, you know, the pushback was, oh, you know, you're just man haters, you know, you just don't want to, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't need to repeat that. People can look into their history books and find that. When we were talking about, you know, positive measures to address historical discrimination in Canada, for example, you know, that the beginning of that wasn't even started. Like we weren't even, we were just talking about goals. We weren't even reaching goals, right, to achieve equality. And then the pushback was, oh, that's all politically correct, and, you know, oh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the pushback is, I think, way greater than our achievements, and we cannot lose sight of that, right? That the mere talk of us wanting equality is frightening to some people. I don't know why, maybe they all need to go and see a good counselor, right? But and I'm not a sociologist to figure that one out, but I think to fail to recognize that, or to let that happen, because we let feminism become the new F word. We let political correctness silence us. We let things happen, and we can't do that anymore. Sorry, if I sound frustrated, it's because I am. I've been at this too long.
No, fair enough. It's funny because as you were talking, I found myself wanting to ask you, like, so what do you think has happened? Which is the questions I hate hearing, journalists ask. But I can kind of now sympathize with the impulse, because I mean I have a lot of questions myself about. It doesn't seem the right moment to ask why now, why with George Floyd, why, because to me, I remember when that 12-year-old who in a park and playing with a stick, pretending it was a gun, and a cop jumped out and shot and killed him. Like, to me, why didn't that cause what we're seeing now? I'm really genuinely kind of confused about the whole thing, and I'm sure COVID and everybody being stuck at home has something to do with it. But and gosh, I'm a little bit stumped, because I don't really I'm finding myself not really knowing what. I understand
Well,
your frustration. I guess what I really want to
well,
know is, yeah, go ahead.
well, I just want to say that, I think that that while the more recent focus has been on George Floyd, and then the blowback is, well, he wasn't that nice a man. Oh yeah, so he deserved to be like executed for for trying to pass a $20 bill? Like, seriously, right? But the thing is that how it's like that clip that you showed during last week's discussion, right, by Kimberly Jones.
Yeah.
It's like, how many, and under what kind of circumstances is it ever going to be, oh, this is the one? George Floyd was just one of a string that happened, one right after the other, right after the other, right after the other. And then when you see like a video of a cop doing that to him, and him saying, I can't breathe, and him calling for his mom at the end, like, how can you not be moved? How can you not be moved? And how can that not be the catalyst of pent up over, God knows, depending on where you are situated in the world, because this is not just an American thing. This is like
Yeah.
a worldwide movement, right? After that, all that pent up frustration, rage, anger, however you want to classify it, right, for all of the injustices of colonialism, of genocide, of like deaths in custody of Indigenous peoples, because here in Australia that is the issue. And then we only have to look at Canada to say, how many more royal commissions do you need on, how Indigenous people have been treated, and missing and murdered women, and so forth. And our brothers and sisters in the Black community saying, racism does exist and has existed and is still going on. So it's like all of that. Finally, I think people are just saying, you know what? It's like that movie line, I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore. Right? And I think that's a worldwide awakening of that situation, of that feeling that it's been so long, colonialism and its impact, slavery and its impact. All of that is now at a point where people are just going, and thankfully, I think, there are a lot of people in the settler community, in the privileged communities, that are looking at themselves and going, what's my role? right? And when I say privileged, we're all privileged in some way, whether it's by class or race or whatever. I think people are awakening to, well, what's my privilege and what's my role to recognize it and not exercise it in a way that hurts others, like to be actually woke about it. So I think, I've been trying to say to people, this is not just about George Floyd. Really, people? Do you think it's just all of this around the world, okay, is just about one man being killed? And if that's all you can think about, you don't get it. You seriously don't get it. You don't get it. You don't get systemic racism and the militarization of police and what that has meant to policing over the past few decades in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there's probably there's a gender analysis too, like Breonna Taylor, right? Why, there was no attention paid to her case until very recently, right? Where they were able to tap into the attention, family and networks there were able to tap into the attention that George Floyd, what happened with George Floyd was getting. So, those of experts out there on these kinds of things could probably talk much more coherently than I could about the way in which gender impacts, victim, because women are always sexed. So you're always a sexualized victim, whereas male is the neutral, right? So a man can sort of stand in for the whole, right? The whole of the Black community, whereas a woman will always be gendered. And a couple things I wanted to just say in response to what you were saying is, I want to acknowledge that when you talk about people, finally being woke, I want to acknowledge that we're talking about white people, right? Like, this is not news to a lot of people of color. Of course, however, we all get politicized. So not all women are feminists just because they're women, right? Like in feminism, you talk about it as the click moment, right? Where sort of sexism, patriarchy kind of clicks for you, right? So just because, not all people of color are politicized around racism, for example. But nevertheless, it's white folks who hold the reins of power. It's white governments that undermine human rights commissions like the ones you've worked on, and defund them and things like that, right? So I just want to acknowledge that's kind of what's underpinning that. But the other thing I want to acknowledge, and maybe I'd like to hear from you on this, is one of the things that's circulating in the news right now is an article that came out in Maclean's around 2016, which argued quite convincingly that racism in Canada is actually worse. So, as many people know, in Canada we have this narrative because we always compare ourselves to the US, and so they're bad over there, right? And we're never like them. Well, even Doug Ford, right? When the Premier of Ontario, he said, thank God Canada is not like the United States. And that's just classic, right, Canadian mentality around these sorts of things. And so not only are we in denial about racism in this country, past and present, but in fact, studies show that it's actually worse here. So I'm wondering, in your many years as an activist, not just as a human rights commissioner, but also as an activist, like, what do you think of that? How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that our education system has a lot to do with it. I mean, when I came to Canada as a 14-year-old, I certainly did not get any information in my school about, Komagadu Maru incident, or that Canada had also had slavery, and the last segregated school was actually closed in the 60s. Certainly did not know anything about Indigenous peoples, and learned about the fact that there were residential schools, the last of which was closed in, I believe, the 1970s. So I think that a lot of people just are just not educated, because it's not really in the school system at all. B, I think this myth of we are better than them, because we haven't had the troubles, if you will, but we have had troubles. Following Rodney King, there was huge riots in Toronto, which led the then Premier Bob Rae to appoint Stephen Lewis and an Ontario Advisory Committee, a working group, to look at racism and come up with strategies to address racism. So, it's not like it doesn't happen, but I do think that because it's not in your face in a way that it is so in your face in the United States, it is, and also because Canada embraced multiculturalism early on as a government policy, we've let ourselves off the hook. And we kind of let ourselves off the hook, because even though when we talked about multiculturalism way back then, it wasn't from an anti-racist perspective. It was from a perspective of, gee, if we all just got to know each other, then we'd be nice to each other. So it became the song, sari, and food, as a friend of mine used to say, kind of, let's all just get along, because if we know each other, we'll get along better. But it didn't address, look, what we're experiencing is actually rooted in something. It's rooted in a systemic, racism and in systemic power, and that also needs to be looked at. So, anti-racism really lost out in that respect, multiculturalism, right? So we could all say, hey, wow, isn't this great, so forth, right? And so I think that that's one of the problems. It and because America has always said that they're a melting pot, right? But the way we used to describe it, and friends in the U.S. used to describe it as, you put everybody into the melting pot and poof, they're supposed to come out as white, right? We haven't had that. And the other thing in terms of comparison was, Canadians have always practiced what's been called polite racism. This was brought home to me by a friend of mine from the U.S. and he said, I don't know. He said, I don't know whether or not I prefer somebody calling me an N-word to my face or somebody smiling to me while stabbing the knife in my back. And that was how he was describing Canadian versus an American forms of racism, right? So, it made me think, really, the in-your-face racism is way easier to tackle. Really, because it's in your face. Right. You can hit it right on, but this whole mythology of, oh, well, how many people know that we had slavery? Like how many people know that we turned back Jews fleeing Nazi Germany? Like not a lot, right? So we get to live in this myth. And how recently has it been that we've come to terms with our treatment of Indigenous people? Not that long ago.
We haven't come to
Not
terms
that long ago.
We haven't even done it.
Well, we haven't. Well, no, yeah.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm just.
No, I know, but like as in, here's the proof. You can't just, say there's no proof of it. It's always existed. But, when you have royal commissions and, the murdered and missing Indigenous women, whose recommendations still not been acted upon, like we're still waiting for what the response is. With all of that, you kind of think, yeah, like we cannot be complacent. Like we've really we have to. That's why people were so, I mean, what Doug Ford said was, pretty laughable. But, you had the RCMP commissioner saying there's no systemic racism. And you kind of go, excuse me? Right? And then, so that why are people cynical about Trudeau taking a knee? It's because we've been here before. We've been there, done that. We need to see different. We need to actually feel different. There has to be tangible difference happening. And it's not.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yet.
No, go ahead.
I think it's not happening yet.
Yeah.
I still don't see, where's the action, where is the action plan? It's still not happening. I feel like they're just waiting for this wave to hit, and then they're just going to go back to same old, same old.
Yeah, I must admit, I kind of feel the same way. I try not to say that to too many people because I don't want to, I think optimism and hope is important. And sometimes the hope is just the hope that comes from the friends that you make and the camaraderie you have with other activists, and you really have to my sense is you really have to hang on to that, because you will be disappointed again and again and again. And you will have, just one hell of a time, right? Trying to get, trying to make any progress at all. And so it's hard. And you and I both, I mean, you longer than me, I want to acknowledge that, but we've worked in institutions, and it's just it's extraordinary, right? So my own institution, issues, a statement much like anybody else's, right? We stand against racism. And for a long time, I think I would have felt that that's a good thing. I'm really glad that my institution is saying something and being vocal and normalizing and the acknowledgement that racism is a reality and we must confront it. But now, having worked with women of color for the past 4 years, I see it very, very differently. And I understand that they feel no hope or optimism. And in fact, it just makes them even more cynical because they've heard it over and over and over again. And as you say, they're platitudes, and there has to be action. There has to be meaningful action. And so really, with a lot of the statements that are coming out, you see those that are just platitudes, and then those that say, and these are the specific steps that we're going to take right now, and then these are the steps we're planning for the future, and they're very concrete actions, right? And I think the fact that some people are making those statements means they've learned. That's a good learning. And that's so, I agree. I feel very much the same way you do about Trudeau taking the knee. Fuck it, pardon my language, screw the knee, get off your knees and go and do something about the final report of the murdered and missing Indigenous women, which has had its 1-year anniversary. Do something about the RCMP, so I'm kind of,
is there civilian oversight right now over the RCMP? That's been fought forever. No civilian oversight of the RCMP, right? So, there's lots of tangible things. And the only thing I would say, I appreciate that there are institutions that talk about, short-term, long-term goals, 3 to 5 year goals, right? And there's something to aspire to, and there's something, that's great. But what if they don't achieve them? Who is held accountable? How are they held accountable? What happens in the review? That's the other thing that I think is a failing, because, right now you're going, okay, well, you want action. Oh, here's the 3 to 5 year plan, right? 3 year comes by and you haven't achieved, maybe a tenth of what you set out to achieve, right? But then what? You just go and say, well, we'll roll it into the next 3 year plan. And then the next 5 year plan, but nobody's held accountable. Nobody is told that your salary increase, your bonus, you know, whether you maintain your job is going to be based on whether these things are achieved. You know, you like, that's why we always, when we were talking about employment equity, for example, we always talked about setting realistic objectives, right? And then the next point was, how are you going to hold people accountable? Because if they're not going to be held accountable, that's all empty promises as well. 3 to 5 year plans, action plans, so-called action plans. Because at the end of that 3 to 5 years, if they don't achieve it, then what? You just, you know, oh, let's put another 3 to 5 years. Like, if you can't achieve those 3 to 5, like those goals that you set, are you, like, you need to report on why, and there better be a damn good reason, because otherwise it's going to be your job or your bonus or however an organization is going to hold them accountable, because otherwise it's still empty. It's still all empty promises.
Yeah, and
You know, so
and
this is what yeah.
That's well understood, right? So there's resistance to, for example, in universities, there's resistance to creating equity, diversity, and inclusion, terms that are problematic, but creating positions that are anything more than a service position, right? Where you're sort of advising people with no real authority, right? And you're not, so no, you're not holding anybody's feet to the fire. There's no accounting, you know, as you say, and that's really vital. Okay, so I want to sort of try and bring this into the realm of sort of thinking about sexuality. And I guess I have two questions for you. One is, having lived, you know, been politically active since the 70s, a period of both, you know, you talked a little bit about feminism, sexism, but thinking about queer politics, LGBTQ2S plus, and then anti-racist struggles, would you say that the queer movement, the gay and lesbian rights movement, let's say that, because that's really the predominant group, would you say they've been more successful than anti-racism movements? And then my second question related to that is, do you think the LGBTQ movement has taken racism seriously as a political movement?
Okay, well, see, when you ask the question, I'm sorry, I'm being bothered by a dog right now. My dog is like, pay attention to me.
We love
pay
dogs.
attention to me. Pay attention to me. So, and then I'm thinking, well, should I let her out? And then she's going to, you know, start barking at the door, or should I just pick her up and put her on my lap? But then well, maybe I'll do that. Sorry, here she is.
Fine.
Hello. Maybe she won't. Maybe now she'll just leave me at peace, because she was just kept bothering me. So anyway, now I'm going to be talking about serious subjects. And can I be taken seriously while you're doing this? Trying to lick my face. Sorry.
No, it's great. I love it.
This is COVID isolation. This is working from home, isn't it? But you know, it's really, it's a tough question, because, you know, when I think, for example, about when I first started human rights work, all right, sexual orientation was not a ground of discrimination covered in federal legislation. It was not uniform across the provinces and territories in Canada. We had to wait until the Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to take it to the courts and have that, you know, finally made known that, yes, historical discrimination against people on the basis of their sexual orientation does exist. And so therefore, even though it's not a specified ground, we are covered by Section 15. And we're all equal under the law, right? So, you know, if you talk about that, and then now, yes, we do. You know, we've come a long way. However, I think our community is still seen, even by itself in a lot of ways, as well as others outside to our community, as a primarily white community. right? And I think that that is the failure in a lot of ways of our community, to call on its diversity. You know, I often call our community the rainbow community, because I've always said, you know, we come from many different faiths, many different colors, and creeds, and we need to really embrace the true diversity of our community. But it hasn't always been so. It hasn't. And, you know, to fail to acknowledge that, particularly at this moment when we know that, for example, when Black Lives Matter talked about why police shouldn't be in pride parades, and the most vociferous opposition came from former, well, let's say former, because I don't know if they were at the time current leaders, but, you know, people who said, well, I started the first, you know, few pride parades, and I just think this is ridiculous. And, you know, the opposition to, you know, instead of hearing what people in our own queer community were saying to us, they were like, oh no, we want the police in. Like, so we're not actually listening to people within our own community. So I think that's a huge problem, and continues to be a problem. And so I think that while our community has made, you know, a lot of gains, we still haven't really come to grips with issues of intersectionality in our community, and what that means, right? What that means to us. So, you know, we have lesbians who are anti-trans, we have white people who won't date any people of color, or are very specific and racist in how they describe, you know, what ethnicity they would date and what they expect of that person. You know, I don't need to repeat any of that. People can go look it up themselves. Educate yourselves, please.
We'll just believe you if
know,
we don't already know.
What? Yeah. No, please educate yourself. I'm tired. I was saying to a friend, I am so tired of doing the education. You know, in the land of Google, you know, and in the land of the internet search, if you want to know stuff, including whether or not the earth is flat or round, you can find it. So look for it. Educate yourself. So the thing is that with our queer community, I do think that we've still got a long way to go. You know, we've still got a long way to go around educating ourselves and supporting everybody in our community. You know, hey, look, and I can't even say, like, this issue is not just true of our queer community. I will always remember being at the World Conference Against Racism in 2001 in South Africa, and having to talk to my colleagues from other parts of the world why intersectional issues were important. You know, because Kimberly Crenshaw had just written a really wonderful paper, and it was starting to become part of, you know, like the scholarly discussion around intersectionality and what that meant and so forth. And we were trying to talk to our colleagues in the human rights community around language to be included in the action plan, to say that, you know, we recognize that racism is experienced differently if you are a racialized woman or a person with a disability. You've got more oppression. It's not like, you know, less. It ends up being more oppressed. And so we have to talk about intersectional issues as well. So, you know, it was an eye-opener really to me that even amongst my colleagues, it wasn't so clear, like that intersectional issues were important. So, you know, I just think that we in our queer community have to just get beyond ourselves and be more open to to looking at what the struggles are, because if it's not race, it's going to be class, poverty. How many of our young people are poor, homeless even? How many in our community are struggling, just to have meals a day, like people who are also disabled. So I think we, when I talk about our community, I just really would like us to be much more expansive in how we look at our own community and who we see when we're talking about our community. I mean, there was a person, this I'm just going to share this with you. It was a crazy making moment. Someone said, well, there's no black or brown in the rainbow flag.
Meaning that they don't belong there?
Meaning that, well, if that they're why isn't it there? And not only that, but they're not in our rainbow community because it's not on the flag as well. Like I think I was so floored by that statement that I just kind of went, what?
Yeah.
Without and that person not realizing that, of course, the rainbow flag has actually now been expanded to include black and brown, right?
Yeah.
But that if that's the thinking of our own queer community members, I just kind of thought like, oh my God, I just shudder. Right. So really, we need to examine. We need to take a clear, a much more serious look at ourselves in our own community, and find ways of. This is where I talk about coalition building, and working together, because when you look at what's going on in the States, like that our the gains that the trans community and LGBTQ people that they've made have been pretty well taken back by this current administration, right? So, and then who's next on their list? So it's like never be complacent and never think it's never going to happen to you, because it could. So keep building coalitions, keep fighting for each other, keep trying to understand what's going on for your brother and sister in the community. I mean, that's why I love the language of the labor movement, right? The labor movement, I mean, okay, the labor movement had its problems with racism too, and every movement has and continues probably to have. But when they talk about brothers and sisters, it's important language. Our community, we have to start looking at our community. This is our family. So, like what I hear, I try to go, okay, I'm listening. I might not be Black, but you are a Black person telling me how this feels for you. Who the hell am I to say that's not real for you? And I hear so much of that going on. I'm just sick of it. I really am. Mm. You as a white, like, I'm not saying you ever done this, okay. But you as a white person have no right to tell me as a biracial person, Asian looking, what I feel, what I've experienced is or isn't to me racism or a form of discrimination. It's like a straight person saying, oh, I don't know, why do you queers feel so like,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I'm sorry.
It's kind of like people saying, oh, pardon me, go ahead.
Oh, I just went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
No, tangents are good. They're as good as dogs. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, having a straight person saying, well, being queer is a choice. Now, for some of us, it is a choice, but for others of us, it is not a choice. So, but anyways, it's a straight person explaining your own sexuality to you, right? It's like,
yeah.
totally
Yeah,
ridiculous and completely
yeah,
offensive. And stop
yeah.
doing that. Everybody stop.
Exactly.
Um, what it's it's interesting because when you were talking there, it made me realize that these fights that were happening about police presence in Pride might have been what do you call that? Like the canary in the coal mine for the Pride movement, right? Like, or for the LGBTQ movement. That that this, which is the issue that's exploding now, right? And it's very interesting. Like, I mean, I sort of pride myself on being very tuned into progressive politics, but I did not anticipate the abolish the police movement, which is, and I was just in a conversation earlier today saying I was completely shocked to see the budget of the Vancouver police, like, blew my mind, so it's very interesting to be having this conversation now, and it would be really great actually to see the queer community take that forward, because that debate became like this. It was about the complete disconnect with the white queer community and people of color, and understanding what the police represent. And so yeah, it would be great to actually see the queer community become a community that pushes that forward. And I don't know if you saw, but in Los Angeles, they decided to make Gay Pride a Black Lives Matter parade or protest or whatever. I'm not sure what language they're using, but to make it an anti-racist event.
Yeah.
And I thought, that was just, to me, that was so exciting, and so that's really connected with the roots of gay liberation and what it was always about, which was a social justice movement, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So I just wanted to, you have participated in the tent that the archives has at the Dyke March, which sadly won't be happening this year. And what's amazing to me always about that is how you're always surrounded by a fairly large group of young women of color. And it's just such a stark reminder of the lack of, well, I don't even know if I want to say that because I don't know if I'm right, but the critical value of having role models who aren't just queer, but also represent you in other ways, right? At other points of intersection. And it's just, to me, it's just I just love that you come and do that. And I just love looking over. I mean, all of you who are there, with all the younger women looking up at you. Anyways, and then when we did the interview last September, you talked about the thing that gives you strength and hope, is young people. So I wanted to ask you if you could end today, if you were like have a lot more listeners and young queer women of color listen in. So if you were speaking to them right now, what would you say to them? What do you have to offer them? And what would, I don't know. Yeah. Is that too weird? Can I ask you to just sort of talk to them for a minute, or share what you would have to say to them, what your message would be?
Well, I'm always kind of, I feel a bit awkward about that
Yeah.
kind of, like what you pass on to the young people, because frankly, I feel as when I participate in conversations with young people, I feel I have as much to learn from them about what's going on and their approach to the issues of the day than they have of me. I mean, I live in a sort of like more historical context, and I can share with them what I feel worked for me and didn't work for me. But I think that young people today have a lot of ideas, have a lot of energy, and just are not given the credit that they deserve for the kinds of movements that they're the ones that have started, like, Greta Thunberg and, all the young people that joined up and with her. And for the life of me, there's an Indigenous woman as well in Canada who's been
Oh yeah,
recognized in the
yeah,
world for her work
yeah.
on water, and I'm very sorry. Major apologies that I just cannot bring up her name at the moment, but we had all those kids in Florida who, after the shootings in the high school, how active they were, and calling attention to gun violence, and so what I would say to young people who are listening is don't write yourself off, because you're young. There may be older people who have trouble listening to what you have to say because they think, oh, I've been on this planet longer, I know more, well, they do, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be open to listening about new things and new strategies and new approaches. And I think that the best thing that we could do together is work together, like why can't young people and old people work together to make change, and so that's what I'd like to say to them is, don't sell yourself short. Don't feel you can't change things, because you're the ones that do. I was young once, and I started working to try and achieve the change I wanted. And this is where you're at now, so I just want them to, I encourage you to continue moving forward with the change that you want to see in the world, because it does begin with you, your friends, your family, and then it ripples out. So I'd say, if you want to discuss anything, reach out. I'm happy to chat with you. I'm sorry this isn't a live thing just because of the major time differences, but if there have been questions or comments, and in fact, if there are questions and comments that follow at some point, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Yeah, that's great. People type things on Facebook and stuff, and you'll be able to see them when you wake up over on the other side of the world.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Reflecting back on our conversation, I realized this is not like, there's no easy answers here. We haven't talked about like hope for the future or, it's neither been too depressing nor idealistic or unrealistically hopeful, but just a kind of pretty candid conversation about how, having done the work that you've done over the years, how you're reflecting on this particular moment. And there's great value in that. I mean, we need the energy of youth. I'm 52 now. I think I'm old enough to say that. We need their energy. But, there's such value to the perspective that you bring to this, and the levity. I think as we get older, we bring a lot of levity because we have, I think most of us have more patience and we have a longer view of things. And young people's impatience for change is a good thing. Don't let that go, but seek out your elders and hang on to the levity, the calmness that they can offer you, because you will need that to help ground you. And I think that's the gift that you've given us today, Mary, is that incredibly rich experience you have. Yeah, no, I always enjoy talking to you, and I always appreciate how generous you are with your time.
Well, you're very welcome, and I enjoy our talks, and hopefully it'll be in person one day once this is COVID over.
Yeah. Okay, I think I will end our official recording there and say,
okay,
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I appreciate. Yeah, and I do enjoy our conversations, but my doggie will be very happy that I'm going to get up and let her out. She's like, oh, she's tried to break through the door a couple of times, so glad you didn't hear it.
Hey, well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mary. And I would love it if you would write in the comments what stood out for you. If you enjoyed it, let us know. If there was something that you think will stay with you, a teaching that was really important to you, please write it in the comments. If you want to get in touch with Mary, as I said, she'll be reading the comments later today. But if you're watching this online somewhere down the road, there's my, oops, gotta go that way. There's my email address. So feel free to drop me a line and I will be sure to pass that on to Mary. So thank you again, everybody, for joining me for another week. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.